Community Development. I'm joined by my colleague, Councillor Ed Flynn, and I want to remind you that this is a public hearing, is being recorded on broadcast live on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, and webcast on www.boston.gov/citycounciltv. Please silence all your cell phones. If there is any public testimony, we will take it after we have the panelists speak. But if you are going to speak, we ask that you state your name and your affiliation and your residence. Today's hearing is on dockets 0111, 0768, and 1183. These matters are sponsored by the mayor and referred to the Committee on Housing and Community Development on August 21st, 2019 for docket 1183, on May 8th, 2019 for docket 0768, and on January 9th, 2019 for docket 0111. For docket 0111, this is a message in order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $123,715, in the form of a grant for the fiscal year 2019 Fair Housing Assistance Program, awarded by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development to be administered by the Boston Fair Housing and Equity Commission. Docket 0768 is a message in order authorizing the City of Boston, acting through its Department of Neighborhood Development, to accept and expend payments in the amount of $30 million given to the City of Boston's Inclusionary Development Policy Fund for the purpose of producing and preserving affordable housing in the City of Boston. Docket 1183, message in order authorizing the City of Boston to apply for, accept, and expend Federal Fiscal Year 2019 Continuum of Care Program grant funds from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in an amount not to exceed $33 million. These funds will be used to support programs that provide services and housing to the homeless. So at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to the panelists to speak in whatever order they feel necessary, and then after that, I'll see if myself or my Councillor Flynn have any questions, or if any councillors were to join us, and then we'll move to public testimony. Okay? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Lila Bernstein, and I serve as Deputy Director for the Supportive Housing Division at the Department of Neighborhood Development and advisor to the Mayor for the initiative to end chronic homelessness. Testifying with me today from Department of Neighborhood Development is Rick Wilson, Deputy Director for the Administration and Finance, and to my right are our colleagues from the Office of Fair Housing. So I'd like to begin by thanking Councillor Edwards for scheduling this hearing expeditiously. I would also like to thank Councillor Edwards and all the members of the Housing and Community Development Committee for your unwavering support of the work of the Department of Neighborhood Development in assisting our most vulnerable citizens in obtaining and maintaining safe and affordable housing. The first item before you is a request to accept and expend up to $33 million in Continuum of Care grant funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This funding supports our work in ending homelessness and providing supportive housing to the most vulnerable households in our community. The Continuum of Care is a competitive federal grant, and we're very proud that we secured our biggest award ever last year. This year, we anticipate we will be applying to HUD for over $30.5 million, more than $1 million than we applied for last year. The vast majority of this funding, over $28 million, is renewal of existing homeless assistance programs that provide housing and stabilization services to formerly homeless households to ensure tenancies. These programs support nearly 2,000 formerly homeless households in housing each year. In addition, this year's application includes new project proposals for additional housing and stabilization services to chronically individuals and families, as well as households fleeing domestic violence. The funds are awarded in the annual Continuum of Care competition. Through this competitive application process, the city issued an RFP, a request for proposal, for new projects, gathered applications for renewals, and will submit the full application to HUD by the deadline on Monday, September 30th. HUD makes the final decisions and typically informs the city about the award in early spring. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter, and I welcome any questions you may have. I will now turn it over to Rick to discuss our IDP request.
Thanks, Lila.
And for the record, just for the record, for those watching, Lila just testified about docket 1183. So before you testify, do you have the dockets in front of you? If it's okay, you're going to...
Actually, I do have it.
Okay. So docket,
Docket 0768.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. And again, for the record, my name is Rick Wilson. I'm Deputy Director for Administration and Finance at D&D, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The second item before you is a request to accept and expend up to $30 million in payments into the city's Inclusionary Development Policy, or IDP fund. As you know, these payments come from housing development projects who have an obligation to provide affordable housing under the city's Inclusionary Development Policy and have agreed to make a contribution to the IDP fund in lieu of constructing affordable units on-site or off-site. D&D manages the collection of these payments and uses the funds to support the development of income-restricted housing in neighborhoods across the city. As shown on the fact sheet you have in front of you, since D&D took over management of the fund in 2014, we have collected over $95 million in IDP payments. Combined with the $21 million transferred over from the BPDA, yields total revenue of over $116 million to date, and we anticipate collecting another $7 million by the end of the fiscal year. IDP funds are distributed through competitive requests for proposals with strict underwriting requirements, with preference given to projects in neighborhoods that generate IDP revenue. The funds leverage millions of federal and state dollars for affordable housing development, and they've been a critical revenue source for the city for the development of affordable housing as federal funds have declined. In addition to building new units of affordable rental housing, IDP funds have also been used for the Neighborhood Homes Initiative at D&D and for the Acquisition Opportunity Program, or AOP. AOP, I think you're both aware, provides funding to responsible developers to purchase existing market rate housing and convert it into income-restricted affordable housing, allowing us to take these units out of the speculative market, protect existing tenants from displacement, and provide long-term affordability in our neighborhoods. AOP has supported the conversion of 263 units of housing since its launch in 2016. So a very successful program. In total, since 2014, D&D has funded over 2,243 units of affordable housing in Boston using IDP revenue. The fund has been an extremely effective and well-run tool for the city, and we sincerely appreciate your continued support for the program. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'll turn it over to Will.
Good afternoon, Councilor Edwards and Councilor Flynn. Thank you for having us here this afternoon. My name is Will Anoha. I am the Executive Director of Fair Housing and Equity for the City of Boston. The $123,716,579 that are before you are part of the CBDG funds that HUD awards our office every year to be able to do the work that we do, and to that extent that goes for paying staff salary, buying materials, doing public awareness campaigns, and education and outreach when it comes to fair housing in the city of Boston. We are charged with the mission of making sure that all housing across the city of Boston is distributed in a fair and equitable way, and make sure that we handle all complaints that come into the office regarding any kind of housing discrimination across the city of Boston. It's also our due diligence in doing that to make sure that we are also affirmatively furthering fair housing by doing this mission. So that's what those funds go towards paying for. Thank you.
Thank you. Just clarifying points, no actual questions about the funding. With the funding for the D&D, the $30 million, these are funds coming from private developments that are going into the city. Just to make sure, you had said that there's, as of 2016, the AOP program had how many?
AOP has converted 263 units.
263 units.
Market rate housing into deed-restricted affordable housing.
And I do know that some of the first of all, it's a wildly successful program. I sit on the Neighborhood Housing Trust. There's nothing. I think it's one of the best examples of how you create housing without having to build too high and deal with the density debates. But one of the questions that have been asked about IDP, and I think it's just a research question, is how do we keep more of it in the neighborhoods that are being burdened or having the amount of development? And there was a historical conversation about, was it South Boston or a lawsuit about trying to keep all the money in a neighborhood. And
Right.
I do know that folks in East Boston are interested in keeping all the money in the neighborhood. And so we can, from Suffolk Downs.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to talk more with the offices to figure out what the legal precedence is that requires maybe citywide distribution. But I understand that still, it's an ongoing debate. I hear it, I'm sure Councilor Flynn
Yep.
hears it, about how, when they're building commercial in Chinatown or in South Boston, they want to keep the IDP money, linkage money in those neighborhoods. So for us as district councilors, I think it'd be great to have an orientation about why it's got to go citywide or what the balance is.
I think, so what we do in our request for proposals are we do include a preference for projects that are in neighborhoods that are generating the IDP revenue, that are impacted by development. We do need to balance that desire, and that is the intention of the policy, to keep the fund, to make the units be in those same neighborhoods. We also don't want to be sitting on a lot of funding waiting for a project to materialize in a particular neighborhood. So there's a balance there, but we are definitely, I think we're all on the same page that we want to, as much as possible, make sure that we're targeting the neighborhoods that are seeing the development and displacement.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate the conversation about furthering fair housing and how this grant will help to push that. Could you tell me the size of the staff right now?
So currently, Counselor, we have about 14 on our staff.
That's wonderful.
Or 13 actually. And what the funding goes towards is it pays for about 6 investigators, 2 education and outreach coordinators, and 1 intake person.
I don't want to steal Councilor Flynn's thunder, but I'm going to ask about language access for the investigators, and how do your materials, are they in many languages? Your investigators, do they speak several languages? Just making sure that, discrimination happens to everybody, and
Yes,
how do
ma'am.
we make sure we're investigating as thorough as possible?
Yes, ma'am. We go through a very extensive, thorough process when we're doing our investigations. But to answer your question more directly, a couple of our investigators are bilingual. All of our materials are in multi-languages: Spanish, English, Vietnamese, Cantonese, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean Creole, and there's one that I'm drawing a blank on. But we do have it in multiple languages.
English?
Huh?
I'm just kidding.
English, yes, certainly.
Spanish.
Also, Spanish, there it is, I'm sorry. Spanish, of course. And so yes, we do have all of our material in various languages. We also do a lot of outreach to various communities throughout the city of Boston to make sure that we are spreading the word and spreading the message and letting folks know that we're there to defend them in any of their fair housing matters.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for your leadership on this important issue throughout the city. And thank you to the panelists for your leadership as well. Rick, the figure you mentioned, 30 million, could you just give a rundown on where most of that money came from what developments?
It's probably easiest for me to provide that offline, Councilor. There's a number of projects that have contributed into the fund. I have the list of projects. We can break it down by neighborhood if that would be helpful for you.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a look at that.
Sure, absolutely.
And walk me through the thought process of how the decision is made in terms of funding certain projects in the city. What do you take into consideration?
So we have, we have a whole department. Jessica Vogt right up there is a deputy director for neighborhood housing development at the department. Her staff of housing development officers, senior housing development officers, review all the proposals that come into our RFPs that we issue every year. We have underwriting guidelines in those RFPs. We have goals that we're trying to meet and criteria that we evaluate all the proposals against. The staff will review those proposals. We have a committee that includes myself, that includes our Director of Policy Development and Research. Much of the senior leadership of the department will review the proposals and make a recommendation to the director for approval. And we try to, we want to, of course, we want to approve everything as long as it meets the criteria and is achieving the goals of the program. And that's how we review and allocate the funds.
Is BPDA part of that process?
No,
Do they weigh in at all?
no.
Yeah, I'd like to get a breakdown of that 30 million figure, where it came from. I just want to try to make sure that it's all going into that same geographic area. Is it going into the same neighborhood, or is it going into an area maybe a half a mile outside, or in terms of logistics, what would the radius be?
So again, we don't target it in that way. We try to monitor the spending of the funds and ensure that the funds are as much as possible. I mean, we can only award funds to projects that come into the department and apply for funding. What I'll provide to you is a breakdown by neighborhood of where the funds came from and where they're going to.
Okay.
So we can, and we're happy to talk to you further about how we manage that process.
Tell me what you're doing down at the South Boston waterfront in terms of housing. Is any of the funding being used down the South Boston waterfront? I know a lot of the money is being generated from the South Boston waterfront, but is it being used, is it being spent to build affordable housing there?
Yeah, is it okay if I call down one of our senior staff members here who
Sure.
can maybe
Absolutely.
speak to this matter better? Jessica, sorry.
Good afternoon, councilors.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Before you start,
yeah.
could you just give us your name, your title, department?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Jessica Boatwright. I'm the Deputy Director for Neighborhood Housing Development in the Department of Neighborhood Development. And my department, as Rick said, oversees all of the underwriting and analysis and then awards for affordable housing projects that we put city resources into. So in terms of your question, Councilor Flynn, about the South Boston waterfront, as Rick described, when funds come into our IDP fund, it means that the developer who's providing the funds has not either built their affordable housing obligation in their building or done it off-site. So, the city as a whole, with our partners at BPDA, are really encouraging developers at the South Boston waterfront to either develop in their buildings or within that radius that you're discussing. But once they come into our fund, because of some past precedent that Councilor Edwards alluded to, what we're doing is we're seeing it as a general citywide fund, and we're trying to ensure equity across neighborhoods with our investments. But we don't, because of just how we do our budgeting, we don't have the ability to hold on to specific amounts within the IDP fund to target them at different neighborhoods. So we're looking at equity across the whole city once it's in our fund, but we're not necessarily earmarking something that came into the fund for South Boston.
What percentage would you say, if it happens in a particular neighborhood, stays in a particular neighborhood based on what we've done in the past?
I think that we should provide that to you, because I don't want to guess. I've been in this position for a year now, and I've been impressed at our ability to spread across the city, but I'd rather look historically. I will say that one thing that one of the reasons why it's challenging for us to make a very specific guarantee about a neighborhood is that we're also dependent on what viable affordable housing developments come to us through applications every year. So it will be good to look historically, because sometimes we may have funds that are coming in from a South Boston project as an example, but in that particular year, we might not have a project applying for funds that, that is from that neighborhood. So we're also trying to balance, you know, getting the funds out into the city and also what projects are coming forward every year that we're able to fund.
Okay. What would happen if there was if you were able to put so many units in the South Boston waterfront, knowing that the construction is so expensive, the property is so expensive, the building of it is so expensive, or you could build more units in a neighboring area outside of the waterfront, that you would get more affordable units. How would you balance the decision in terms of, would you have 10 units at the South Boston waterfront, or would you have 50 units outside of the South Boston waterfront? Maybe it's towards Dorchester Avenue or West Broadway, Broadway Station area, or you know, the south end of Chinatown area. How would you balance that decision?
I think as much as possible, we would try to not make it be an either or. I think we would love to have more viable projects coming to us for applying for funding and support in every neighborhood, and particularly in South Boston and those neighborhoods, East Boston, that are impacted by development. So I would say, you know, obviously we don't have unlimited funding, so we can't spend more than we have, but I don't think we would try not to kind of pit those against each other. I think we have our underwriting standards, we have the targets that we're trying to meet in terms of income, you know, spreading our funding around in different income brackets, lower income, middle income, moderate income. I don't know if there's anything more.
No, I think just what Rick said, that we're using our underwriting standards. There is an upper limit on what we can pay per unit, but in general, we're mindful both of how things adhere to a number of different categories that we underwrite to, not just the cost per unit, and also our mission as a city agency to spread resources across all the neighborhoods as much as we can in any given year.
Okay, thank you. The reason I'm asking is I'm really curious about just the South Boston waterfront is so expensive there, and to put units there to build is very expensive.
Yeah.
Or do you put them next to an area that's undeveloped where you get more units built, maybe the price is lower? That's what I don't really have a particular position on it, but I would know if that is a scenario that I'm sure you'll come across soon.
If I may interject, to answer some of to add some context to some of the questions, a lot of where the money can go is also depending on who's applying for it. So if we don't have, that I know of, CDC maybe in South Boston waterfront, like we do in East Boston or we do in other corridors, they're applying repeatedly for, at least at the Neighborhood Housing Trust. So in many cases, a neighborhood may feel that it's not getting enough of the linkage money, but they also, I know we don't have, and many people have expressed the need to have a CDC in Charlestown and other parts to be advocating to get a piece of this pie. So a lot of that is work for us to work with local nonprofits and other developers to start to ask even for some of this money. And also just to add some context, and again, this is not for anyone in the room, it's for us folks watching. The Neighborhood Housing Trust requires, I think it's 10% of the units, in order to get the money, 10% of the units have to be 30% AMI and they qualify for homeless set aside. So that I think really helps, because one of the critiques has been, you know, sometimes affordable isn't even matching the income needs of a lot of the folks in the community. So to have 10% of the units be reserved at a moderate to low income to get the money is something I wanted people to be aware that is happening. So I just wanted to add that to you for Kev's. Are you all done? I have a couple more.
I just wanted to add two more comments. The HUD money we're getting, I think for the homeless program, I think that the success of the homeless initiative by Mayor Walsh, I think that's incredible work that the city has done, especially on helping our homeless veterans.
She's coming back.
Oh, okay. Helping our homeless veterans, I think the city has done a tremendous job in ensuring our homeless veterans that need assistance have it. So I just want to thank the mayor's office and thank the Department of Veteran Services as well for their incredible work on that initiative.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then I just want to say thank you to Will and his staff for excellent work. We hear great comments from what you're doing, especially in areas where we have low-income residents, where we have a lot of immigrant community.
Thank you, sir.
Diverse neighborhoods. So I just want to say thank you to Will and your team for supporting our residents across the city, but especially those that really need housing, really need assistance, but need government, because there is a lot of discrimination out there that is happening to a lot of immigrants across our city, many in my district. So I just want to thank Will and your outreach effort as well.
Thank you, Council. I appreciate it.
So just for a follow-up to offline, some research, and I just also had some things to add to the list. One, we were going to get the income-generating projects where they're being spent for the IDP. One other question is, I know that they have 7 years upon the completion of a project to make their linkage payments. Is everyone on time with their payments? Are there any late payers? And is there any way, this is again offline, I would love to see if there's some people who are late in their payments and that we're getting them as, well, per their payment plan.
If I could just quickly.
Go ahead.
We have I was just doing the math. We have a 99.6%
Excellent.
collection rate. So there's a handful of, I'll call them delinquent payments that we're working on. We have outside counsel, we've invoked legal, we're doing legal proceedings where necessary to collect it, but it's a fraction. So we can provide that to you if you like.
And also just maybe out of curiosity, what is the legal proceedings? Do you just add interest to it? How do you get the money if they don't pay for it?
Yeah, no,
You take away, the building's built, so you can't.
Yeah, we're filing suit if necessary. Yeah.
Okay.
We have one right now that we actually just filed a complaint on. So.
Okay, and so I do know that we are in the talks, and we're all hopeful that our home rule petition will pass at the State House. And I look forward to having conversations about what the increase will look like. We're at $30 million right now, but if we get to certain percentage increases, so I think I'm really excited. Just to talk a little bit about the relationship between fair housing and DND. I know that when it comes to equity of the lottery system, for example, and the advertising is part of helping to assure that we're complying with fair housing laws. But is there other points where we're dealing with furthering fair housing and the grant distribution further upstream in terms of dealing with the furthering fair housing? I know I have a zoning amendment that's dealing with the BPDA, but are you guys talking beyond the lottery system?
So yeah, we do have a monthly meeting where we meet with D&D and other community partners where we discuss our efforts for affirmatively furthering fair housing, Councilor.
Okay.
So this does take place on a very consistent basis where Chief Dillon sits in on these ones as well too, from D&D.
And just to make sure I'm clear, on the Continuum of Care Program, there's, all the comments that Councilor Flynn had noted about homelessness and our efforts in the city, I echo them. I think they've been excellent. I think your leadership has demonstrated our commitment to assuring that we are really going to get rid of chronic homelessness. I'm curious about with this particular grant funding, and I'm still happy we're getting it from the federal government, how when you see in terms of projections, and I see that we're increasing the amount, do you see that is actually a sufficient amount, or do you think that do you think we're getting what we can get, or do you think we need more resources?
We absolutely need more resources. We are applying for what the federal government has made available to us based on the size of our community and the numbers that we submit of people experiencing homelessness. But it sounds like a lot of money, $30.5 million, but primarily that's being spent to fund units of housing that people already live in. And so the need among people experiencing homelessness is much, much greater than the funding that we're receiving. And I've never even, done the exercise of what would it cost to actually have the housing resource for everyone who's experiencing homelessness that they need, but it's much greater than the grant that we receive from the federal government.
Well, we'll work with what we got for now, unless you have any other questions, Councillor Flynn. If there's any public testimony. All right, well, thank you all for coming to testify, and we'll just look forward to following up offline. For now, the hearing on dockets 0111, 0768, and 1183 is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors.